name's Joanne and I am a full-time landlord, so I feel your pain. I have a portfolio based in Southend, Manchester and Liverpool, so I actually work with some quite diverse stock. As well as working as a full-time landlord, I also work part-time with the NRLA. So I'm a local rep and my job is to come out and to work with other landlords to educate them on how to be the best type of landlord that you can be. Today we're going to be speaking about the really interesting and deep conversation of damp and mould, and let's have a look at the agenda of what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to talk about, what does the law say? So black and white, as landlords, what should we be doing? What happens if we get it wrong? And actually, as you'll see later on, the consequences are really quite far-reaching, not only for us, but also for our tenants. We'll look at the 5 Ps, so how you can get ready and make sure that your property is ready for a tenancy, and how you get to know your tenant the best way possible so that you are pairing the right tenant with the right property. We'll look at what do we do to set you up for success. So for you as a landlord, what do you need to have in place to make sure that your tenancy is successful and that your tenant is happy in their home? First of all, we need to look at the legal obligations. Obviously, as landlords, we need to work within the rules. And there are 5 key pieces of legislation that cover damp, mould and condensation. The first one is the Landlord and Tenant Act, and if you want to sleep really well tonight, you can read section 11, and that will tell you that the landlord is obliged to keep in repair the structure and exterior of the dwelling house and keep in repair and proper working order installations, so like the supply of utilities, sanitation, heating. You've got the Defective Premises Act 1972. So as a landlord, you are liable if a tenant were to suffer an injury or damage as a result of disrepair. So if, for example, if you as a landlord, your tenant has said to you, look, the banister's not working, it's come off the wall, as I come down the stairs, I've got nothing to hold on to. You don't fix it and that tenant falls down the stairs, you are liable and you are at risk of prosecution under that law. You've also got the Environmental Protection Act, statutory nuisance. So again, criminal prosecution if the premises is prejudicial to the health of your tenant. We've also got more recent legislation that's come in 2018, which is the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act 2018. And that piece of legislation actually became retrospective, so it covers all tenancies in England as of March 2020. So basically what that says is that you need to keep the property in a state that is fit for human habitation, and that you need to be able to prove that that property was fit for human habitation at the beginning of the tenancy and throughout the tenancy. Within that legislation, there is also a specific section that relates to keeping the property free from damp and mould. Please be aware as well, under this piece of legislation, tenants don't actually have to go to the local authority to be able to look to prosecute you. They can go direct to a property tribunal where action can be taken against you. The last piece of legislation we've got is the HHSRS system. So I like to think of this as a checklist. If you've ever had a visit from an environmental health officer, or an environmental health officer comes to one of your tenanted properties, they will walk in with this checklist, and it covers 29 different areas, and one of those is damp, mould and condensation. They will rate you, or they will rate, the property and the different areas on the likelihood of there being an issue in the next 12 months for any of the tenants in the property. But they will specifically look at the likelihood of illness or injury to tenants that are either young or old, the most sort of susceptible in our community. Now we know what we have to do, we need to look at the consequences. Do we know who this gentleman is? This young boy is Awab Ishak, and he lost his life because of damp, mould and condensation. He paid the ultimate price because his landlord didn't do what needed to be done. He was a tenant of a social property, but that doesn't make any difference. His family complained about the conditions that they were living in, and those complaints were not acknowledged or acted on. Death is obviously the ultimate price to pay, but more commonly we see damage to health. In the UK, 1,500 people a year die as a result of asthma. We all know someone who has asthma. My husband has it, so does my daughter and my best friend. Anyone who is living in a rental property or in any property with damp or mould is 50% more likely to have enhanced effects of asthma. In addition to that, you are looking at effects such as wheezing, eczema, eye inflammation and gastro issues. Not only is the physical health affected of your tenants if you don't get it right, but there is also the mental health. I purchased a property a couple of years ago. It was a 3-bed terrace property. It was a mum and a couple of children. We purchased the property and it was in an awful state with damp and mould. Immediately, we moved mum and the children out into another property that we had so that we could give it a complete refurbishment. During that process of dealing with mum and moving the children out, Mum said to me that her daughter, who was 11, had never had friends home from school. And that was because she was so ashamed of the conditions that they were living in. Mum had done everything that she could to keep on top of it, but the fabric of the building was not fit for purpose. So that child was being socially isolated because of the actions and the disregard of her landlord. We've also got consequences from a legal point of view. If you've ever had an environmental health visit, I can tell you normally they will have a chat with you and say, look, this and this needs to be done. If you choose then to ignore that, what they can do is actually serve you with an improvement notice. You can end up with an emergency action notice or a prohibition order. A prohibition order can say that a building that is used as an HMO can't be used as an HMO. It can say that a property can't have children within it. Other actions that can be taken are a suspended action, hazard awareness notice, or a demolition order in the worst cases. I've bought a few of those that should have had a demolition order on them. Penalties for non-compliance. It's unlimited fines in the criminal courts, and civilly as well you can be sued. You can be banned from working within the private rented sector, and rent repayment orders are now on the increase. So your tenant can take you to the property tribunal, and you as a landlord can be required to repay rent for any period of time that a property wasn't suitable for your tenant. There are huge risks to you from a legal point of view if you don't get it right. There are other consequences as well. If you have a property that you decide not to take action on that has damp, mould and condensation, and you have a good tenant in there, do you think that tenant is going to want to stay in the property? You are risking losing good tenants. Once you've lost a good tenant, you've got an empty property. You've then got to pay to refurbish it. You've got to pay the mortgage while there's no one in there, council tax, the utility bills, and you're paying hefty tenant fine fees to find a new tenant. You've also got a risk as well that if you've lost a good tenant, the new tenant that comes along won't be so good. Reputational damage for you. If you are not getting it right within your town, within your working area, it doesn't take long for people to speak to other people and for you to get a reputation for being a poor landlord. And that is something you want to protect yourself from. Prevention is always better than cure when you are looking at renting out your properties. Other dampness effects. So we've spoken about legal consequences, health consequences, and we've talked about business consequences. There's actually consequences for your building that you are leaving unrepaired. We all know what a split pipe looks like in the middle of winter. We've got a beautiful picture of it here. Well, water expands by 9% when it freezes. So if you have got water ingress in your building, that is splitting open the building blocks of your unit. That will then cause ongoing issues. Metal corrodes when it's wet. So if you've got building ties, if you've got screws, nails, metal back boxes to your electrical installations, they are all corroding as your building is getting wet and staying damp. Heat loss. A damp wall is 40% more expensive to heat than a dry one. Okay, your tenant is paying that bill, but is that fair? We always say proper preparation prevents poor performance. Prepare your property. This is a 2-bed flat that I exchanged on a couple of weeks ago. I didn't actually take this picture with the thought that I was going to use it within my presentation, but as I was putting it together, it definitely sprung to mind. When I'm looking at this property, I'm walking around and I'm understanding how much I'm going to have to pay to refurbish it. Let's take a look at the picture. As you can see, the clothesline is in the building. He is having to dry his clothes in the kitchen. There is no space for a tumble dryer. We've got no ventilation in the room. The window doesn't open and we've got no ventilation again above the oven. When you are looking at your properties to rent out, it is really key that you spend some time living in the head of your tenant. What are they going to need in that property? How are they going to behave? What does it look like in terms of their cooking? How are they going to dry their clothes? And prepare your property correctly. Know your property. As I've said to you, I manage Victorian stock, but I also manage new build properties. They behave very, very differently. Spend some time looking at your property. What insulation have you got? What grants are available? What's the EPC rating? Look at the tenant type that is going into that property as to what other grants that you would be able to access. Heating. The old single radiators placed under a drafty window is really not going to cut the mustard. You need to be upgrading when you have the opportunity to do so. Kitchens and bathrooms. You can now get some fantastic anti-mould paints. We use them as standard within our refurbishment projects. We use the Glickstone Klein product, which is actually recommended by the NRLA, and that just prevents there ever being an issue. Be aware of where more mould is going to build up. External walls, corners of rooms, window sills within bathrooms and living areas. Know your tenants. I always think about picking my tenants like playing pairs. I want to pair the right tenant with the right property. If I've got a young couple, it's the first time that they are going to live on their own. They don't have huge experience of running their own home. I am not going to put them into a property that I have just cured a damp problem in. I am not going to set them up for failure. When I am looking at tenants, I am also very much assessing their budget. How much can they afford to pay for heating in a property? Again, I don't want to set a tenant up for failure. If I'm putting them in an older Victorian building that is costly to heat and I know that their budget is tight at the beginning, I know the chances are they're not going to be putting that heating on and the property is going to suffer. It is really important that you do the right level of due diligence to have the right tenant in the right property that they can afford. What's your tenant's history in rental properties? When I do a viewing with a tenant, I will always ask them, why are you moving? Have they had problems before? If a tenant says to me, I'm moving because I've got a damp and mould issue, that's a great opportunity for me to speak to them and for me to understand what their knowledge is about running a home and how you need to ventilate it and heat it. Spend some time to get to know where their education or their level of knowledge is at and how you can support them. What's a tenant support network like? Have they got people around them that are going to help educate them on living in their first property? Also, over accommodation. Sadly, in our world, we have so many families that are looking for accommodation that I am often asked on a 1 or 2 bed property, I want 4, 6 people living within that home. I would love to fix it for those families, but I know that putting too many bodies into a building will only set them up to fail. Make sure you have the right number of people living in a property and that it can sustain that number of people living within the property. So what are your processes for success? What do you need to be doing to make sure that you are set up? How does your tenant report a problem? Is it easy for them to do it? The reason Amazon is so successful is because it is an easy click, click, click. We have an online system so that our tenants can report any problems that they have come through. The sooner I know about it, the sooner I can fix it. The happier my tenant is, the healthier and the safer that my building is. If you're working through an agent, how does your agent let you know that there is a problem? How does the agent get told by the tenant that there is a problem? How do you manage those works orders that come in? How do you acknowledge them? Where do you record them? As we looked at under the Fitness for Human Habitation Act, it is your responsibility to be able to show that the property was suitable for the tenant at the start and throughout the time of their tenancy. You need to be recording and acknowledging any works orders that come through and be able to be responding to them within a timely manner. What tradespeople have you got? If you get a leak, a boiler blows or a pipe splits at 12 o'clock on a Sunday evening, is your plumber going to attend? Make sure your network around you is there to support you. Talking of networks to support you, what support have you got when there is a problem? Obviously, I'm going to tell you to join the NRLA, but are you attending local landlord meetings put on by your local authority or by outside associations? Facebook is fantastic. I've had many a problem within a rental property around damp and mould and thought that I've done everything I could do to fix the issue but still not got to the bottom of it. A video on one of the groups has often given me the answer that I need. Set yourself up with support. It can be really lonely being a landlord quite often. Property visits. How often is your property being visited and inspected? Lots of landlords like out of sight, out of mind. Personally, that doesn't work for me. I complete a property visit every 6 months and it is a photographic and written property visit completed by a third party. The lady that does our property visits is fully trained and our tenants often enjoy her visit. She comes back with cakes. While she's there, if there is a problem, because she's trained to be able to spot the difference between rising damp or a condensation issue, she's often able to support the tenants while she's there, completing pieces of education, checking that fans are working, showing how to make sure that things are clean and kept on top of. A bit of time spent with your property visit person can make the world of difference. If you're using an agent, who's doing those visits for the agent? And if you have a property visit and there are actions that come off of the back of that, how are you going to manage those actions? It's really important that your tenants are supported and felt heard when they are reporting issues. Finally, I would say to you that working with your tenants is about communication, and a little bit more communication. Educating your tenants. I didn't understand until I started doing this job just how many litres of moisture we put into the air when we sleep. I didn't understand how moisture goes to the cold spots in the property. I didn't understand the difference between penetrating damp and rising damp. We have a handout that we send out to our tenants if they report a damp, mould or condensation issue, and quite often that enables our tenants actually to be able to do the legwork for us. I will get a call that says, "Jo, we think that the damp course has been bridged because that's the picture that you showed us within the handout." I know what tradesperson to get out there. That is all done through educating your tenant. There are many handouts online, most of them created by local authorities. Have a Google, they're quick and easy to find. YouTube is also a great educator. There's some very short videos which show you and explain how the different types of damp, mould and condensation occur, and they will make the world of difference both for you and for your tenants. But more than anything, just keep talking to your tenants. Your tenants do not want an unhealthy home to live in. They want a nice, clean, tidy and healthy home, the same as you want to provide that to them.